Hello, and welcome to Life with God, a podcast where we explore key ideas in God through conversations with students and expert guests. In Season 4, we focus on the concept of beauty, and our guest in Episode 3 is Susie Phillips, the chair of the Earth and Biological Sciences Department at Loma Linda University in Loma Linda, California. We're also joined in this conversation by Rainer Suarez. Before the discussion, we will spend 5 minutes getting to know our guest.
What are your top 3 hobbies?
Reading, going to the beach. What I spend the rest of my time doing is cleaning the kitchen. So
something in nature that reminds you of God.
I love the consistency of sunsets.
What are some of your childhood cherished memories?
Trying to keep up with my sisters riding bikes while we were in Taiwan. That was always a thing, trying to be part of that group. And then being with my family when we would take trips together, riding in the car, long haul trips my parents like to take and go camping.
The most beautiful place you've ever seen?
Oh, well, I like the beach. I like Hawaii. I get an opportunity to go there regularly. And I especially like that. To me, it looks like what heaven might look like.
What are a couple important things you have learned from your travels?
Oh, well, I've gotten to travel quite a bit, and the importance of recognizing that humans are humans, but we each come from a very unique culture, and culture is very, very different. And what's good and appropriate in one culture is different in a different culture. And so being able to see different cultures, not only different lands, but different cultures, and yet the similarity of humanity.
Why biology?
That's a good question. Well, I started out in college as a chemistry major, and then I realized very quickly that chemistry was nothing more than the language of biology. So why learn language when you can get to know the people? In terms of cultures, I wanted to know the real story. And then as I began to study biology, I realized very quickly that I was studying the artistry of the life giver, and man, that just thrills me. Biology thrills me. It makes me very excited, and it's a beautiful, beautiful world.
To follow up on Rainer's question, what are some of your current research interests?
So currently I do research on bacteria. I'm a bacteriologist, a microbiologist by definition, by education. I happen to be studying bacteria and how they sense their environment and what decisions they make after they sense their environment. So kind of the decision-making process inside bacteria. And I especially love what's called bioenergetics, which is understanding how cells make energy from what they consume, and in these bacteria, how it drives nearly all of their decision-making processes. So we don't really think about bacteria making decisions often, but they have little proteins in there that help them make decisions.
We should come back to that later.
Yeah.
We're just heading out of a pandemic. I'm curious of knowing what have changed in you after the pandemic, now that you're not directly studying virus, but it's related. Is there anything that in your perspective has changed?
Well, I would say that watching so many people become so adversely affected helps us realize how fragile we are, helps us realize how important our immune system is, our God-given, very amazing, beautiful thing that is our immune system, and how really eating healthfully, being healthful, making good choices, thinking positively, all of these things honestly had a real impact on your survivability of COVID. So from my perspective, it was reinforced to me our mortality, that God did not create us immortal. Instead, we were told that we had to reach forth our hand and take from the tree of life in order to maintain our life. Even when we were perfect before sin, and that's the way it will be in the end of time as well. God says, he'll put blessed and holy are those who get to partake of that. So, just reminded of our mortality, our dependence upon God for everything. And that we really need to, we act in concert with God. He's given us things, and if we treat them badly, like our immune system and our bodies, they don't perform optimally. And that was obvious with the COVID pandemic, that obviously there were some very pointed disparities among different groups that had nothing to do with health or not. But among those groups of people, those who are healthier had less of a poor prognosis.
One last question here. What are some of your favorite spiritual practices?
I love to talk to God. I think about what is described with Enoch, and he walked with God. And I know that I don't know if he saw him face to face. We know in the Bible there's talk about Moses seeing God face to face, but at the same time just seeing the back of him. So what does it mean? So I've thought a lot about what does it mean to walk with God, and so I pointedly try to pray without ceasing. I pointedly try to imagine Christ walking into my office, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, and what would I say to him, and how would I interact with him? Is he my friend? Am I happy to see him? Am I embarrassed to see him? And then we carry on a conversation. So my prayers often start with, if he was in this very room, how would we interact?
So Dr. Phillips, I am going to confess my complete ignorance on the topic. I think the last time I took a biology class was probably somewhere in middle school. So that's quite a while ago. And I personally have not had a chance to interact too much with this field in relation to theology. So I'm really intrigued. I'm very open to hear and learn from you. I'm very intrigued on the topic, because also beauty and biology are not always associated together very easily, or yeah. So this is going to be the connection we're going to try to draw together, listening to you primarily. And so my opening question is, how do you see God's beauty in biology?
So how do I see God's beauty in biology? To me, that's the very essence of what I'm studying. I'm studying artistry, and I'm getting to know the artist by looking at the work that he's done. And so what I find, first off, I want to comment that we often think that science and biology and chemistry is so far removed from our life, and yet at the same time, the reality is it's the very essence of everything that we do. We drink water. We put dishwashing soap on our greasy pans. We eat proteins and count our macros and eat carbohydrates and fats, and all of these things are biology. It's a surface level biology, but it doesn't make it less biology. So just because you haven't had a formal class doesn't mean you aren't very intimately familiar with biology. It's the essence of our living and breathing, and all of it all fit together. So don't say that you don't know much about it. Really, you do. And the more life experience people have, the more often they really are experiencing biology. So to me, the beauty of biology is that, first off, scientists have come to understand that what we see happening in nature, whether that's we're looking at the individual cell or looking at the trees or the atmosphere or whatever it is we're looking at, it all has functionality. It's not a random byproduct. And to me, the functionality of everything. We look at it and we say that we can comprehend this. This has been our experience as a scientist, that we can do research on this. We can go into the laboratory, and actually what we normally do is mess it up. And we take this beautifully functioning thing and see if we can purposely mess it up, and then see what problems result after we mess it up. It all is comprehensible. It's something that we can understand. We can wrap our minds around it, and so to me that's a beautiful thing. To harken back to math, which is of course just the language. Once again, I talked about the language, chemistry being the language of biology. Math is a language of physics in which governs how our atoms interact, how our proteins interact. And math describes those, and that once again goes back to the functionality of life. All of these things are coming together to produce what we call a living thing. And so that all of these things are comprehensible, that all of these things are functional, to me is just so gorgeous. I mean, there's nothing out there that doesn't that is not there for some purpose. Sometimes I believe that purpose is just beauty, that there's just something beautiful that God wanted to make. I'm looking at my silly cat right now, laying where she shouldn't be, and her funny antics, her joy in play. This is God's gift to us to bring us joy as well. So to me, those are beautiful things.
I'm wondering if there is some kind of proportionality between something being beautiful and functional, and if especially in nature, and we know that we have this discussion in the evolution theories and stuff. How does it work usually? If something is more beautiful in nature, does that mean that it might be more functional for reproduction or survival purposes in general?
Well, certainly, if you talk to a mathematician, they're certainly going to say that. The more elegant an equation, the more elegant an answer, the more likely it is to be true, to be correct. The more simple something is, the more likely it is to be correct in math. And in nature, it does kind of get metaphysical when you talk about beauty, because essentially beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I believe that we perceive beauty similarly to the way God perceives beauty, because we are made in his image. And so I look around at this world and I think, oh, God really likes the colors blue and green, because that's what we're surrounded by, and that's what we perceive as beautiful. If you ask a human what they perceive as beautiful, almost always it's something natural. So in terms of functionality, I don't know to tell the answer, because what seems beautiful to me might not seem beautiful to you. But when I look at the elegant systems of bioenergetics, I mean, to me, it's so gorgeous, and it's so beyond what I would imagine God would do or someone would do. It's beyond what our engineers would think of to do to make energy within the cell. And yet God found the most efficient way of doing it, and the most dynamic way, and the most multifunctional way of energy generation within our cells. And to me, that's gorgeous. So I see it, I'm like, oh, that's so elegant. Wow, it could be used to do work. It could be used to just in halfway through the process, you could use it for locomotion. It's so elegant, the different pathways bioenergetics can be used within the cell. So functionality and beauty, to me, that's beautiful. But it may be in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, it's also interesting that at least in philosophy, I think, thinking specifically of Kant, for example, who separated science and aesthetics. And I think that has trickled down over time to our thinking today, where many people differentiate between the two as if they're two completely separate things. So functionality and purpose has it's got something inherent, so to speak, to an object or a person. And then beauty is defined as something different than that. But you see them as together, and somehow for you, one defines the other. Like they're somewhat interchangeable.
Well, of course, I'm coming at this, looking at this from the perspective that God created these things. I don't know how much thought he put into designing bioenergetics. I don't know. But when he spoke matter into existence, when he spoke light into existence, and whenever that happened in the time frame, so many of these laws that govern how you and I function right now, the fact that I might be thirsty and have a cup of water here next to me, that is bound up in those laws that he created when he made gravity, things like that. When he so all of these things, to me, that's beautiful. The interconnection of everything that he created and how it benefits humanity. There's just the uniqueness of what biology produces and the uniqueness of the way biology functions that is uniquely beneficial to us living on this planet. It's incomprehensible, honestly. It's not something that can happen naturally and without design. It really couldn't have happened that way.
I was speaking recently with a friend of mine, Rebecca, about we were discussing Heidegger's Being in Time, and we made a connection about language and verbal and nonverbal language. I'm not going to go into Heidegger here, but the connection was that God's also, just like in our human communication, nonverbal is a significant part of communication, but we don't often write about it or read about it or really try to understand it. So the focus is always on the conceptual aspect, the linguistic, and I think she suggested in connection with that God's general revelation might be kind of a non-verbal communication to us, right? And special revelation is conceptual, is verbal in Jesus and in the Scripture. So he actually articulates with words through Jesus and through Scripture to us this truth. And then the idea was that these two have to be harmonious, because oftentimes in human communication, the problem is when nonverbal and verbal conflict with each other. And so with God, these two things have to be harmonious. And I'm tying this back into what you were sharing, even just, water, and how we have to orient ourselves based on the laws that we function in, that we were created into. And we cannot really disregard them. But the reality that we also experience today because of sin is that there is also a great deal of suffering, especially in biology, right? That is one of the core issues in theodicy, we would say. And so in many ways, it's almost like this nonverbal communication doesn't, of its own, can pose as many questions and problems as offer pointers to God in a positive way. Do you have any comments on that from your perspective as a scientist?
Well, in my household, growing up, we always had animals. In my household now, I have animals. My one sister that you haven't met is a veterinarian, and interacting with animals is something that's been a regular part of my life. Mm-hmm. And I had a thought a while back about the reality that God's thoughts are above our thoughts. And he has taken great pains to reveal himself to us, verbally, in person, in form. He came and lived among us. But at the same time, he is above us. And yet, even with these lower creatures that we interact with, we're able to communicate with them. But often that communication is emotive in nature. I kind of, coming from a scientific perspective, always, maybe it was some influence of my upbringing as well, always have the idea that emotions are something that you need to always be able to think beyond and act beyond those. But the reality is the way that we communicate with lower organisms is emotive. We communicate with our cats, our dogs, the animals that we work with, horses, working animals, dogs, working animals, are very emotive. And so for God to communicate with us on a very emotive, I love you, I'm angry with you, seems a natural outflow of our experience. This is the way we communicate with organisms who might not be able to understand us completely. We love them desperately. We would do all sorts of things and spend thousands of dollars to take care of them. And in some cases, they're wrapped up. They're part of our own psyche and part of our own mental health. That God maybe is emotive to us, and so his nonverbal communication with us might be very emotive in nature, might be expressions of love, might be expressions as opposed to these are the things I did, these are the things I said. So I love you. Here's the things that I'm doing for you. So that I care about your life. Here's the things that I'm doing. So that I hear your pain and suffering. These are the things. And so to look at my interaction with God, to look at my religious experience with Christ, the Holy Spirit, how we interact with him, and to allow there to be a very emotive portion of that seems like a beautiful thing. It seems like a natural reaction and a natural interaction according to the nature that God created.
That's making me think of some episodes in the Bible. For example, on the Mount of Sinai, when God was about to make this covenant with his people, and there was a channel of communication that provoked an emotive response. In this case, being fear. But I'm pretty sure that we can find some episodes in the Bible when God is communicating and I'm not sure, maybe with the purpose of getting this response, which is purely emotional, maybe preparing them to understand something else. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, from my perspective, I feel like we need to view everything that God does in light of what he did, and that is on the cross. So to look at what he was willing to do to save us, to look at that as the core foundation of who he is, his love, his joy, his desire to have a relationship with us. Once again, to me, this is beautiful. This is an expression of beauty, and a definition of beauty is love and empathy. To look at then all of his actions as a mechanism to express his love and as a mechanism to save us. So the fear invoked at Mount Sinai, because it says the people were afraid. They told Moses, "You go talk to him. We don't want to talk to him. He scares us." And God's response was, "I have done this so that you will understand. So the fear, so it will be in you. So you'll understand that this is holy. This is real. This is real. Your eternal life, your life depends on this." So I don't want you to think, oh, this is just something you do once a week. No, this is real. And so sometimes humans have a tendency to not grasp or take seriously their health, the choices that they make, until something scares them, like COVID, for example. And then suddenly we've gotten scared. Now we're like, oh, maybe I need to work on my health and eating more healthfully, and my pre-diabetes and my obesity, because it's fearful to me to lose my life from a common little respiratory infections. That's fearful. And so people take action that is positive in their life. And so to view God's actions from that perspective, once again, shows to me his desire to have a relationship with us, and his desire for us to be saved, his desire for us to live eternally, happily.
Nature.
Sorry, I just wanted to make a connection with your previous comment about how God's nonverbal language is emotive, because I had never made that connection between natural laws, which are always thought of in scientific, objective terms, and emotion. And I really have to ponder more on that concept. But the truth is, people do see beauty in nature, and they connect with themselves and with each other in nature in a more natural kind of way, I guess, for lack of a better word. So even as a context, not just what we see, but even how we function in nature brings, some of the best things in us in some ways. But I wanted to delve from that perspective a bit more into, maybe shifting perspective a little bit, into your particular research interest, especially microbiology, and bringing up the concept of complexity, because in the history of philosophy and in early Christianity, and then for a long time in the history of Christianity, God was conceived as timeless and simple. I'm just having some conversation these days with my students about God's simplicity, because it doesn't make sense to us that something simple is the perfect, the ideal. So when I think biology, I think complexity. And what are some of your thoughts on complexity and beauty from your perspective?
Sorry. Cool. So, So to me, there's a double-sided coin, complexity and beauty. In terms of, we often think of things that are simple as being more beautiful. And yet the reality is that complex things are we view as very, very beautiful as well. So, when we look at the relationships between a family, people might look at that and say, that's beautiful. And yet it's also very complex. There are choices being made on both sides of the parents, the father and the mother, in order to maintain their marriage, to maintain that relationship. There's choices being made about, well, what I'd like for my child is this, but they're maturing, so they need to have the opportunity to choose that. So it's also very complex. So a well-functioning family looks beautiful and simple, and yet the reality is, to make that beauty is a complicated process of self-control and self-awareness of each individual involved, especially the parents, until the children make their way up. So to me, this is also biology. In terms of bacteria, in terms of what I study, the ecosystem, the biosphere that God made for us, really just, it floors me. And it's phenomenal in that we would not be able to live on this earth if it weren't for bacteria. Bacteria, certain groups of them, carry out specific functions that no other organism on the planet does. And if they don't do those things, we don't live. We don't live, plants don't live, nothing lives. And so here we are, these at the top of the food chain, at the top of the intellectual chain as humans, looking at it from just strict who we are on this planet and the role that we play on this planet. And yet our life is also dictated to us by the bacteria that are present and working in this system. So this system is not only complicated, but very robust in that it can receive a lot of pressure on one side and the other side, and then always bounce back to being functionality. So I view maybe our biological system almost like the ark that Noah built. Wow, it can really, but it always goes back to this dynamic equilibrium of functionality. And so the bacteria, the fungi, every single species of plant has a unique, typically a type of unique fungus that lives with it and helps it grow. Well, we don't usually think about that when we think about plants, and yet this intricacy, this beauty of this interconnectedness, that oftentimes we don't realize, because we put ourselves in buildings and we control the air, we control the temperature, that we don't realize that our very life and breath has been thought out by God and has been taken care of in these beautiful, intricate systems that are there. And to me, once again, this is a beautiful thing. This is a gorgeous thing about what the fungus do for the plants, and what the plants do for us, and what the plants do for the animals. And it's just, to me, it's like what Christ said about eating of the bread of life, that you must take these things internally. So to me, it's a spiritual picture of my dependence upon God. My life, my breath, my very heartbeat is dependent upon the natural world around me, the same way, and more importantly, the way it's dependent upon God. And so whether I'm thinking about it or not, I live and breathe and have my being in Him. And that's just exemplified to me. It's a type that I see in nature.
Yeah, well, nature has this ability to make us feel small sometimes, and in the best way. I mean it, not that we're insignificant, but that there is so much to appreciate than just our own needs and immediate situations. And that's it's being especially important in the spiritual growth of people following religions, and also in Christianity. Is it that vital? Can someone be a Christian without appreciating this nonverbal channels of communication? And what's your opinion on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, God is here to save, and whether he's saving people who live in the concrete jungle, they've never actually seen a real tree growing, he's here to save. So your relationship with Christ, I think personally, having the opportunity to visualize nature, having the opportunity to visualize bacteria, how they make decisions, the proteins that are involved there, the intricacy, the delicacy, the beautiful, perfect balances that come about. These are beautiful things, and they tell me about who God is. But God also reveals himself through the whisper and through his word. And whether you have the opportunity to look at nature or not, God will find you where you are and reveal himself to you. He desperately desires to love you and to save you. He desperately desires to know you. And so while nature and while understanding nature and understanding biology to me augments my perception of who God is, he has revealed himself so clearly that it's just a blessing. It's like icing on the cake, but I'll eat the cake anyway. It's just something better on top from my perspective. So clearly, whether you see and appreciate the things in nature doesn't affect whether you're a Christian. On the other hand, I will say that the positive effects on nature, from nature on the human psyche, for example, on mental health, there actually are scientific studies now out on that chemicals that are released from pine trees decrease anxiety. I happen to live in the mountains above. I'm looking out my windows right now in the mountains above Loma Linda, and we have hundreds of huge pine trees on our property. So the door's open and the smell is coming in, and I smell pine, and that's decreasing my anxiety levels, it turns out, as well. So everything, it seems, is here for our good. That said, obviously, there are things in nature that are not good. We'll talk about theodicy issues, and that's spoken about very clearly in terms of as it being a result of sin.
Well, I have two questions right now, but I'll start with one, I guess. I am intrigued to hear a little bit more about the idea that bacteria makes decisions. I think that's the way you phrase it. I don't think I will understand the technical language, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about it anyway, because that's not a life form we usually associate with will, right?
Sure, and I don't know if it's free will or not. They have a mechanism to sense their environment, and when they sense a good environment, they will turn from whatever direction they're going and move toward that good environment. So they have mechanisms of sensing, and basically that's just to feelers that are put through from the inside of them and the outside of them, and they have feelers that are interacting with the environment and transferring information from the environment to the inside of the cell. And when that information gets inside of the cell, then the cell takes some action. And sometimes there's multiple inputs coming in, the same way if you think about neurons, there's multiple inputs coming in, and whether the neuron fires or not has to do with these multiple inputs. And in bacteria, it's the same way. You might have multiple sensors coming in saying different things. They might be sensing oxygen concentration in the environment. They might be sensing the sugar concentration in the environment, maybe the amino acid concentration in the environment. These signals all come in, and they're all being funneled basically to the flagella motor. And when you add all these signals up, does the flagella spin this direction or that direction? That's the decision that gets made. And so the bacteria would then go toward one thing and away from another. So maybe it chooses to go toward oxygen and away from the sugar, because at that point in time it needs oxygen more than it needs sugar, something like that. So in terms of decision making, it's kind of adding up all the signals that come in, and then the output has to do with the adding up of those signals. So similar to how a single neuron might function in a human, then of course realize that we don't just have one up there. We have quite a few similar type of processes that bacteria carry out, but they are their sensing systems are very, very delicate in that over the surface of them, which might be a couple of microns, so thousandths of a millimeter, they can sense the variation in concentration over that little tiny surface of their body, basically. And so they have very, very sensitive systems for sensing their environment and maneuvering around in it. I'm studying bacteria that can maneuver. Not all bacteria can move around in their environment, but the ones I study those are the choices, those are the decisions they're making. Are they going to move this direction or not that direction? kind of thing.
So by bacteria, you also, like, bacteria is also in us, right? Like in our body. So what you're describing actually is happening in us kind of constantly as well.
Yeah, so there are a number of places on your body where you naturally have bacteria. And the good news is the good Lord made us an amazing immune system. And our immune system, I feel like, God made bacteria, but like the ostrich, he didn't give them a lot of sense. And so they don't necessarily know where they're supposed to grow and where they're not supposed to grow. So our immune system's there to say, yeah, not here, move on, grow someplace else. And so the places where they grow naturally in our body is in our colon, mostly. There are a lot of bacteria coming out of your colon on a regular basis. And part of the mass that makes up what comes out of our colon, a large percentage of the mass is actually bacteria in nature. And they live there. They do good things. Some of them actually perform services for our bodies. Some of them are just, clingers on. They just live there. A lot of them, because they're living there, they don't let other things move in. So things that might be detrimental to us, because there's already a whole group of organisms already living in your colon, the guys that are detrimental, they don't have a place. They don't have a niche, basically, and they just have to pass through because there's no place for them to live. Other places that you find bacteria, your skin, the surface of your skin, we don't find a ton of them there, but certainly if you take your fingers and put them on a petri dish, stuff will grow. There are definitely bacteria there. So that's why, before you get an injection, they always rub your skin with alcohol to kill just the bacteria in that little local area, so that when they put a needle in you, they don't take some of those bacteria and push them into your body, where they'll be like, "Woo, look at this, there's blood and oxygen everywhere, let's start growing." They're not supposed to do that. So really, the good Lord has just made an amazing immune system. The only place that we actively have to be careful about bacteria is here. We have to actively scrape those guys off of there on a regular basis. Otherwise, they cause problems. Other than that, all the bacteria that's living on you is good. It doesn't cause any troubles.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
bacteria.
Yeah, I think that sometimes the things that we have in nature, and even if they're as small as bacteria, they're not only tell us something about God, but they tell us something about our situation here. Sometimes it's like the story of life persisting death in general. So and maybe trying to connect this with nature as a channel of communication. Sometimes nature tells us more about the great controversy than it does about God, for example. Would you agree with that? Like, it's always about life, like holding on to life in some way in every scale.
Well, I think definitely, God, this is an expression, nature's what God created for us to be in terms of what he created. And then he put us here. He put us in this place. It says, put us in the garden and said, here it is for you. I think there were many, many lessons to be learned at that time, and nature was not touched by sin at that time. I think there are still many, many lessons to learn at this time, but nature has been touched by sin. And there's predation and there's death, and we don't know what it looked like beforehand. We don't know about, for example, cellular death versus organismal death. Is it okay for bacteria to die in a world without sin? Is it okay for human cells to die in a world without sin? Recognizing that human cell death is part of our natural developmental process. You know, we while we're being made, we have webs in our fingers, and those cells die off in between there, so we get digits. As we can, do whatever we need to do with those digits. So, the question of what did the natural world look like before sin came is a real stretch to begin to imagine. I don't know the answer to that. I think what we see right now, even here in Southern California, life persists. They pave the road and they put concrete everywhere. And here in the little cracks, there's something sprouting and growing. Palm trees grow out of the cracks of sidewalks. It's really phenomenal. Like you said, the tenacity of life just reminds us of the tenacity of God's love. Even in the most unimaginable places, God is there. He is there for you. It doesn't go away. His tenacity is profound when it comes to his offering love to you and the possibility of relationship. It's a beautiful thing.
I do have a follow-up question on that. My mind was also going in the direction of maybe discussing a little bit evolution from the biological perspective, and thinking about beauty in the sense of God's beauty of character. Beauty is a complex thing that permeates many aspects of existence, right? But God's beauty of character seems to be problematic in basic evolution, where the idea is that death precedes the fall of humans, so it cannot be then accounted for in terms of human action. And therefore, God is ultimately the only responsible person for that. And it's very problematic for my studies. Theologians and maybe even scientists have tried to reconcile that in some form or another. I don't feel like they're really doing it justice. I think it's quite a stretch. But do you have any insights on that? And also maybe specifically from a biological perspective?
So certainly trying to combine the God that we find in the Bible and the theory of evolution into something like theistic evolution really does damage to both theories. It does damage to evolution because evolution by nature is a natural phenomenon, which means nothing supernatural could ever in the history have ever interacted with what's going on. And so to superimpose God on top of that and say, well, no, but God made the first life, because that's really a really big problem for evolution, to try to figure out how life started. And then how it became more complex. There's just no natural process for that. There's nothing that we ever found. And so to say, well, God then did this. God started life, and then he interposed at different times and created more complex things. And that does damage to the theory of evolution. No real evolutionist would accept that. And of course, it is not consistent at all with what the Bible says. The Bible plainly says that's not how things happen. That's not at all consistent with the character of God. That we find. The God that we get to know when we read the Bible is not a God who he says he's not. He doesn't like death. He says this is not how he created. He didn't create by death. And evolution, by definition, requires death. It requires that things die off. The less fit things don't survive. Not that that's actually a mechanism to make something more fit, and not at all. It doesn't actually function that way. But to realize that an evolutionist is someone whose worldview is different than mine. Their worldview is that nothing supernatural could ever have interacted with the world. And my worldview is that a loving, personal, divine being that, as self-described in the Bible, interacted very, very specifically with this world, to the point that he bent down on his knees and breathed the breath of life into this form that he had made and created a living man. So to bend down to put your mouth on someone else's mouth and to breathe life. That's a very intimate connection that God has with the things that he's made. So the God that we see in the Bible, and I'm going to always say how he self-describes. He's the one who said what things to put down in the Bible. He describes himself as a personal God, creating something beautiful for us to be. And for God to look at something and say, that's good. He created this world and said, that's good. This beautiful place is a good place. And now I'm going to make these humans to put there the pinnacle of his creation, the very last thing that he made, that for the whole purpose of enjoying that and to be subjugated to, all the world was unsubjugated to man. And God brought the animals to Adam and said, these, they're beneath you, and you name them and you care for them, and you care for this earth. Is very, very different, completely different than an idea of theistic evolution, where God had a part in it. That's not how God self-describes, and to decide that we decide how God is. We've decided that God created by using evolution. We don't get to. We're in a relationship with him. We don't get to decide who he is. It's like your husband finally coming home one day and said, "I decided you're a brunette, and I'm going to treat you like a brunette." What? Who I am is who I am. In fact, it's inherent in his name. Who he is who he is. And he has revealed himself to us. It's not up to us to say, we don't think you could do that. We don't think you could have created by. He says, well, this is what I did. This is who I am. And we're in relationship with him. We don't, the same way when you're in relationship with your spouse or your significant other, you don't get to decide things that they say about themselves aren't true. You're in relationship with someone who you've created in your own mind.
Yeah, and even if we restrict our, let's say, convictions of evolutions down to microevolution, what if someone tells you, like, okay, look at this plant and how microevolution gets set to be this color, and this color seems beautiful to us, but we can, by scientific method, provide evidence that prove that this color is beautiful as a result of microevolution. So God's hand is not directly involved in every kind of beauty that we see in nature. What would you respond to that?
Well, so from my perspective, God made our genomes with the possibility of being dynamic, in that not supposedly, the reality is that every variety and different color and shape of human that we see on this planet all came from a first 2, and then after that came from 8 people. And so our genomes are not, they are dynamic. They can be influenced by the environment, and the environment that we're in, we end up with this offspring or that expression in ourselves, or another expression in ourselves. So to me, I see all this potential as, these are all the things that could be, and then either God said, okay, go have fun, or let's see what happens when these different environments show up. To me, I look at it, I think in terms of new discoveries and new technologies. I always think, well, let's look at the natural world, because the natural world does such amazing things. I mean, for a long time, people looked at birds and say, oh, they can fly. That's not something humans can do. But God all along is like, yeah, but I made Bernoulli's principle. They just haven't figured out how to use it yet. And then finally someone came along and figured out how to use it. And he's like, hey, they made airplanes. Now they can evangelize the whole world. So to me, I see each new discovery is God's like, oh, they discovered that law. They discovered this principle. Now they can do this. To me, all those things are there and ready for discovery. And all the potentialities are things that God is aware of. And whether we do it this way or that way, I think, whether we discovered flight when we did or later, I still think the same way with whether we take part in generating Chihuahuas and Great Danes. Those are two very different organisms, but yet they're the same species. And at the same time, they each have a potential beauty of their own if you really like Chihuahuas. But all that dynamicness and all that variation in expression of those genes was present basically in wild dogs and wolves. Maybe you can breed these things out, and you can get spotty dogs and short dogs, and dogs with big jaws, and dogs with big skulls, and you can get all this variation, all inherent in the initial genome. So to me, that's just a beauty yet to be discovered. Who knows what's out there, and God made this originally. I think that he's delighted and surprised the same way we're delighted and surprised when our children come up with something. And we're like, oh, I never thought of it that way before. I'm sure that he knows the potentialities, but to see us come up with those, I think he's just like, nice, finally, they get to fly. Now you can go visit Hawaii. So I think he's delighted in those things. Nice, cell phones, good job. Now you can talk to your mom.
Interesting. I really enjoy seeing just your passion, I think, for both the field that you are studying and for God, and just that in showing us that the two can be quite compatible. I think that's really refreshing and inspiring. I do have a personal question though in that regard, because the way you portray yourself right now may not have been your journey in a constant kind of way. And I wonder, have there been ups and downs in your journey as a scientist, as a biologist, in reference to our topic, God is beauty, but also a relation between God and biology, maybe?
Sure. Well, honestly, I was always a believer. I always believed what the Bible said. When I got to college, I realized that, hey, maybe I'm in some cult. I need to study these things for myself. Is this what the Bible really said? I always took the Bible as an authority. And the reality is that in my experience, humans look for an authority. To allow the Bible to be your authority brings the best joy, brings the greatest happiness. To allow celebrity to be your authority, to allow popular culture to be your authority, all of these things degrade humanity and degrade you, and it will not lead to your happiness. And so early on, I decided the Bible was going to be my authority, and I decided to look into it and say, well, I've been raised in this religion, but is this really real? And actually, it was during my time in college that I spent time looking at this. So learning biology and learning and spending actual time in the Bible to decide is what the Seventh-day Adventist Church really is that found in the Bible? What they teach, is it what the Bible really says? Because that's what I wanted to experience. What I have experienced up and downs in is I guess I would say spiritual laziness, spiritual laxness in failure to take advantage of what God is offering me, which is relationship and the power to overcome sin. And so I get bogged down with doing whatever I want to do, and I cease to remember to be God's first. I cease to cultivate that relationship. Because when you're having a relationship with someone who you can't see, you have to cultivate that relationship. And that's what we're doing as Christians. We're having a relationship with someone we can't see. And so we need to take specific steps. I will say scientifically, it's absolutely science to me, because God invites us. He says, taste and see that I am good. When you are with me, you will experience the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And the first gifts of the Holy Spirit are love, joy, peace. Love, joy, and peace. The very last one, self-control. Still working on that one. But when you are with God, when you choose to put yourself in relationship with God, when you choose to talk to him, just to say, God, I know that you're here, and I want you to know that I appreciate who you are. I recognize you as my creator. I worship you as my redeemer. You are worthy of worship because you created. You're worthy of worship because you redeemed. And actually have that conversation with that being that you can't see, you begin to experience love and joy and peace in a scientifically measurable fashion. When you don't talk with God, those things in a measurable fashion greatly diminish in your life in a measurable fashion. So to me, the existence of God, the relationship with God, has been scientifically proven over and over again, honestly, because I can measurably see in my own life a difference of who I am as a person. I don't like myself when I'm not with God. I'm a nasty, obnoxious, unpleasant person. But when I'm with God, I'm a person that even I can appreciate and respect. When I'm without God, I am unrespectable. I am unpleasant. I don't experience love and joy, and my self-esteem plummets, because it's God who gives me self-esteem. He says, you're worthy and I want to be with you. You're my child. And you have value because of who you are, because I created you. And that only in connection with Christ can we have value and recognize our value and have a healthy self-esteem and experience love and experience joy. So to me, this is scientifically measurable, and yet another evidence that God is real, that God is exactly who he says he is in the Bible. So there's never been a point where I didn't believe that, but there are multiple points where I fall away stupidly and become an unpleasant individual. And until my unpleasantness stinks up my own room, then I'm like, oh, what have I done? Oh, it's what I haven't done. I haven't talked to God.
Reiner, what are your takeaways from this conversation?
Oh, well, I want to say first that I feel like it was a privilege today listening to someone who is in love with God and his creation. And that's going to be my major takeaway. Maybe I won't remember many of the details, and I got some other insightful takeaways, but the experience of seeing and listening to someone that has experienced God's beauty through nature, and this person being a scientist, I'm not going to forget that. So thank you very much. And also nature as a channel of communication that communicates, and maybe sometimes in the language of emotions, to provoke emotional responses. Nature as a gift to humans that has this inner potentiality of growth, innovation, resilience, many things. So thank you very much. It's been wonderful. Yeah.
Do you mind if I make another comment that I feel like this expression of God's love to us in nature is a beautiful thing. So God recognizes that humans need stability in their life. We need something to be the same. And when things are not the same, we get distressed. And at the same time, we seek adventure, we seek the new. And I just think what happens in the world, especially the celestial bodies, is really fantastically adapt for this, which is every night you go outside and you look at the stars, and every night it's different, but not scary different. The moon is in a different phase, but not scary different. You anticipate this, but at the same time, oh, look, the moon's full. But ooh, it's a new moon. There is no moon. So every night is something different, and yet predictably so. Every sunset is something different, and yet every sunset happens. A sunset happens every day, and yet each one is different. In that God builds into nature stability and at the same time variation that we crave. For example, the seasons. Every season is so strikingly different and yet dependable. These seasons come and we recognize that, but yet we're ready for a change. We're ready for something new. It just speaks to me of God's desire to give us joy, desire to meet our needs in a very natural way, to provide us with stability, at the same time provide us with something new. Every single day is something different. The sun goes down at a different time every single day. That change, a constant change, and yet reliability is something that I feel like God just is like, here's another gift for you because I love you, and I want you to know I love you. And I want you to know I'm taking care of your needs as well as your desires, to fulfill you this way.
That is wonderful. I will have to include that now in my takeaways. So I guess I will try to formulate two. I'm still grappling with some of the concepts in a technical kind of way, but from what I understand, more of the surface, I guess, for me, would be, as Rainer said, the idea of how nature speaks to us, and the fact that you associated the word emotive with natural laws is just perspective changing for me. It may be how I experience it, but it's not how I describe it in language. So somehow my conceptual thinking needs to catch up with with this idea. And I think the way we articulate things about God is also very important. So I would like to articulate it more in that sense. And I think even the idea that you just mentioned now, how basically nature, all these life forms that are part of nature, that is this context in which God had put us when we fit well, how it's responsive to our needs. I think that's just beautiful. It just makes it feel more like a living organism than something we control, right, and dominate and things like that. And it actually takes care of us. Even in this sinful world, it takes care of us sufficiently to see the beautiful architect behind it, maybe, that beautiful mind behind it. And I think the other idea is related to complexity, because I personally like complexity. And I think the idea of God as timeless and changeless and immutable and simple has been extremely detrimental to theology, to his character and nature. I think having a reframed understanding of that helps us is in our understanding of God from a theology perspective, but also from nature, that this is the real world that God created for us, that we're not a shadow of a true reality. This is a real world that God created for us, and it's one of change, sufficient change and sufficient constancy, maybe you would say, to meet a variety of our needs. And I would just point out that this will carry into eternity. So when God returns, he will create a new earth. We will still have the experience of time and complexity and change. And so I'm just intrigued to go out after this conversation and be more aware, more articulate about my relation to this context in which God has created me to exist and function. So thank you so much for that change of perspective. I'm sure our viewers will also appreciate very much your insights and your direction. And so now I will invite you to speak also to our listeners and our viewers on the topic of God as beauty and biology.
Well, just listening to what you had to say there, I was just, to me, I guess I view nature as part of God's love letter to me. Here are the things that will make you happiest. Go experience them. Here are the things that will bring you most joy. Go taste them. And the things in nature are so diverse. And once again, from my perspective, we're living on a once drowned planet. There are so many indications that violent geological processes took place, and at the same time, life still persists here. God's hand is still here in the beauty. He's made these things to increase our mental health, to give us a well-being, to let us know that he loves us desperately. He's made all these things to care for our needs. You can just, where I'm from in southern Missouri, you can just go out and live because there's black walnut trees and there's natural springs and there's persimmon trees that grow wild and everything's just there. Just go live in it. A little different out here in the desert in California, but this is God saying, I love you. I want to take care of you. These beautiful things are here because I want you to know that. I want you to know I love you. It's to me, it's a beautiful thing. So I love studying nature, even the little tiny things, the bacteria. To me, that's just like I said, it lets me see a different side of God. because just his love seems simple, um, and it is, but the complex way that God has had to go about making sure that we know it. He can't see us face to face anymore. He can't talk to us face to face anymore, where our sins have separated us from him, is what it says in Isaiah. And yet he finds ways to express his love, I believe, through nature, and of course through each other. He says, I will draw them with the bonds of human love. He also gives us family and loved ones to draw us to him, to be a blessing to us. So to recognize that the good things, as James says, every good and perfect gift comes down from heaven. To look at nature and recognize how much of it is good and perfect, and this has come from our God. All of it, all the good and perfect is from our God, and it's beautiful.
A heartfelt thank you to our special guests and to the student panelists for their thoughtful engagement. On behalf of our sponsor, the Adventist Theological Society, and on behalf of the Life with God team, I would like to also thank our viewers and our listeners for being here. We hope that you have learned some new and helpful insights that will transform you more into the likeness of God and empower you to become a better human being. As you can see, these conversations bring together young adults and scholars who have dedicated their lives to advancing our understanding of God, of the Bible, and of the complex human personhood. It is a unique opportunity for you to get to know these committed servant leaders and learn from them as they interact with students from around the world. If you would like to support this podcast, you can do so with your presence, your comments, your prayers, and by sharing the program. If you're so inclined, you can also extend your financial support by donating to the Adventist Theological Society. To do so, go to www.atsjats.org/resources and find the Donate Now button. Make sure you also subscribe to the Adventist Theological Society YouTube channel, where you will find past and ongoing seasons. Thank you again, and I hope that you will join us next time as well.